G'day, g'day. I thought I'd throw together a comprehensive guide on the Unity Asset Dynamic Voxelizer. Everything will be timestamped in the video description below, so go ahead and skip to the parts that are most relevant to you, or stick along and listen to the whole thing as I go from A to B and getting the whole thing set up. I actually saw this asset on sale on the Unity Asset Store, and I thought, well, that looks really interesting. I'm actually going to pick that up and see how it works. Since it's a new asset, there's no videos on a comprehensive guide on it yet, so I thought, why don't it be the change I want to see? And that's why I decided to do this full dive on the asset. I don't want to harp on too long because I do believe that tutorials really should be quick and concise, straight to the point, and not having any bloatware words or statements in it. But unfortunately, due to the nature of this asset, it is going to take a little bit of time to cover from point A to point B, but stick with me and we'll get there. But I decided to make a quick review at the end, which is aimed to help new users to Unity to identify whether this asset is simple to pick up or whether it requires some time, which is a huge factor when considering whether you should learn a third-party tool or not. So if you're wanting to hear my opinion about that, feel free to jump to that first and then return to here. The video sections are broken up into key parts, which are what does the asset do, how to install the asset, how to set the asset up and some troubleshooting, some extra features, and of course, my review / my opinion. Without further ado, let's get into it. Section 1. What does the asset actually do? Shockingly, there's some Unity assets that do not convey what they do well, or in some cases, they don't explain what they do at all. Dynamic Voxelizer is not one of those assets. It's pretty clear from the store page what it does. It creates a voxel around the shape of an object. It can make that object vanish and even act as a Thanos snap and vanish it into thin air or into the ground. This alone motivated me to want to get it and at least try it out, and I'm bloody glad I did. So well done iNab Studios for this one, because you made it very clear on the product page of what it does and what to expect. Now, before we move to the next section, let's have a quick look at what the asset is on the asset store so we know that we're looking at the right one. So here the asset is on the asset store, and it shows us some of the effects. And as you can see, it hasn't been reviewed yet. Here's the overview of the product. Now let's move on. Section 2, installing. So I just tried to install the asset through different methods, and each time I did, I broke the asset in my project. So it's really important that you follow the first steps of setting up the project prior to importing the asset into your project. Otherwise, the asset isn't going to work, and it's going to be a real hassle to try and remove all the files related to the asset from your project. So please, if you're skipping ahead and following along with timestamps because you're trying to work it out by yourself, make sure that, and I'm going to read off of my notes here so you have the instructions directly. You need to ensure that you import the visual effects graph from the Unity register into your project first, and then you need to make sure that you go to edit, go to the VFX submenu from that, and press rebuild and save all VFX graphs. If you don't do that, the asset is not going to work for your project. Now, for those that are following along with this tutorial, you're not going to have to worry about that because we will be following it step by step here. So let's go ahead and make a new project. I'll be using URP. However, the asset does also support HDRP. So again, I'm using URP. To keep that in mind, if I say URP for something, you're going to want to use whatever pipeline is relative to your project, okay? So we're going to hit new project. I'm going to select URP here, Universal Render Pipeline, or now SRP, 3D. I'm going to name my project the Dynamic Voxelizer. I'm going to also make sure I'm not connected to the Unity Cloud because this is just a tutorial. And I'm going to go ahead and press Create Project. Alright, now that we're in our project, I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off because I don't want my overlay to be interrupting any of the inspector settings here or anything that might be on my screen. So I'm just not going to take that risk. I'm going to go ahead and disable my camera. Alright, now with my camera off, let's go ahead and get our project set up for the asset. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my README asset here. I'm going to go ahead and remove the README asset. For the important part, this is what must be done. We're going to go to Window, go to Package Manager, and up the top here, we want to go to Unity Register. Because my Package Manager is anchored to the bottom of my screen, that's where mine's going to be. But if yours is popped up wherever, of course it's going to be the same. It doesn't matter where it is. It's just that mine's anchored down the bottom here. Once we're in the Unity Register packages, we're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we are looking for the visual effect graph, and we need to install that first. That is the first thing we must do. If you're importing this asset into a project you already have, then you need to make sure that you import this graph first before you import the asset, otherwise the asset will not work. Now the second thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Edit and then Preferences, and we're going to go to the Visual Effect tab down the bottom here and ensure that the experimental operators /blocks is enabled. If it isn't, just go ahead and enable it. Then what we want to do is go to Edit and then go to VFX and rebuild and save all VFX graphs. This is what must be done before you import the asset. Go ahead and click that. Okay, with that done, we can actually import the dynamic voxelizer asset either through the store page, or we can go through our Unity asset in the package manager. And then we can go ahead and download it. Of course, there's the two ways of getting it. The first way is just by going to the actual asset in the Unity asset store on your browser and click open in Unity, and then open in Unity editor again. And of course, alternatively, you can just go through your package manager and look at my assets and look for it manually there. You need to download it first. So just to catch up to where I am now, just hit download. And once it's downloaded, go ahead and press import. We're going to import everything here. So just press import. Next, we're going to go to package, go to the iNav Studios, and then click on Voxelizer. You're going to want to import the correct Unity package relevant to your project. So if you're using HDRP, you'll double click that Unity package. But since I'm using URP, I'm going to go ahead and double click the URP one. I'm going to import everything here. Once that's done, to get the demo scene to work, there's two more things you need to do. If you're not interested in the demo scene, you can go ahead and restart your Unity project and you should be good to go. But since I'm going to be using the demo scene, first of all, I'm going to need to import the TextMesh Pro and import the essential resources. This is that way this demo scene's text will appear. And then finally, I need to go to Edit and then go to Project Settings. And then I need to go to Player. And I need to change the Unity input system from the old system to the new system, or at least using both. And I'm going to use both. So I'm going to go ahead and click both. If you can't find your active input system, it will be under this monitor icon here. And if you still can't find it under there because everything does look the same in terms of font, you can just type in input handling. And as you scroll down, the correct field here will be highlighted for you. So I'm going to go ahead and click both. It's going to ask that I restart my Unity project, which is perfect because I need to do it anyways now. Go ahead and apply. This takes us into section 3. Let's take a look at the demo scene. To get to the demo scene, we need to open up in our project window, the iNav Studio, go to the Voxelizer URP. Again, if you installed the HDRP project, you're going to open up your version of that. I'm going to go ahead and open up my Voxelizer URP. I'm going to open up my Showcase Voxelizer URP scene here. As the scene is opening up, you may notice here objects are taking a second longer to render their materials, and this is a good sign. Immediately loading into the scene, you'll notice you're starting to get this console warning, disabling TAA because MSAA is on, and this will be happening every frame. To clear this, we can go to our main camera, and in the inspector window, we can go to the rendering category, and then under anti-aliasing, we can change it from the TAA to any other one. I'm just going to change it to the SMAA, and now I can clear, and you'll notice that there's no warnings or errors inside the console. The current release of the asset is version 1.0, and it breaks the scene into 5 parts. There's basics, examples using C#, Voxelizer versus local, Voxelizer simple, and Voxelizer mesh with normal shadows. When the demo scene loads in, the only part that is active is the examples using C#. I think the developer made this scene first as it's a simple interface to quickly display the asset's effects. However, its intended purpose is to showcase the script usage. It doesn't showcase what the asset is exactly doing at surface level. I think the best thing to do here is to actually select this game object parent and disable it. And let's go ahead and open up the basics first. Let's expand that and we'll click on the barrel. This is what you should see here. If you have icons displaying here, what you can do is toggle this button on and off. So if you have all these icons currently active in your scene, you can just go ahead and click this button, temporarily disable them. Remember though, in future projects that you'll need to turn that back on, otherwise you won't be able to see all your gizmos that are currently active in your scene. If that turned off, I don't really need to worry about the game window too much. However, the game window is still displaying this text here to show us what's going on. Just going to set myself up so I can see everything here. You see on the left, we have the barrel. On the right, we have the vase, and then we have the canvas, which is just being used to display this text for us. If we expand the barrel object here, we can see that there's a VFX graph, and under the vase, we can see that there's a VFX graph as well. Let's just close them back up to their parent objects. Still with the barrel object selected, we can see over here on the right hand side under the inspector that we have a Voxelizer effect script attached to it. We can see that we have 4 subcategories. We have setup, effect settings, and visual properties, and testing. Expand the testing category. Down the bottom here, we have transition methods, which is original mesh to Voxelize 0, Voxelize to original mesh 1, dissolve to Voxelize 0, Voxelize to dissolve 1. Beneath that, you can see you have a manual, and it's a slider from 0 all the way up to 1. What actually happens is when you interact with these buttons here, it sets different states for the Voxelizer and the disappearing effect to occur. So the original mesh to Voxelizer will take the original mesh of the object, such as this barrel, into a voxelized state. Let's go ahead and press that button and see what happens. We just had a bit of a rendering delay there, which is completely fine. What we can do is now we can go to Voxelize to original mesh to revert that change that we just did. And now we go back to our original barrel. Let's go ahead and try the original mesh to Voxelize again now that we've got the effect rendered. And look at that. How cool is that? And obviously you just saw me a second ago do the Voxelize to original where it drops those voxels onto the ground. So let's just do that again. How cool is that? That is such a cool effect. Alright, let's now try the dissolved to Voxelize. So that just disabled our barrel's mesh and gave it the Voxelize effect. So if we go inside this barrel, you can see that we're not actually seeing anything else other than the voxels. And now let's try the Voxelize to dissolve button. Now all of a sudden we have nothing there. But game window, you can see we have this ghost outline, which is just there to show us is that that's where the object should be. We could already get a pretty good idea for what this asset can do for us. For example, we might be like, oh, well, let's get the object to create some kind of armor effect. And then let's do a magician's disappearing act. And all of a sudden the object's gone. How cool is that? That is such a really, really cool effect. And we can do the same thing to the vase over here. If we go to testing, we can do the original mesh to voxelized. And then we can go to voxel to dissolve, and just see how rather than dropping, it kind of Thanos snapped out of existence. So this breaks down like this, right? Original mesh to voxelized is to take the original object and cover it with voxels, transforming its appearance. While voxelized to original mesh sees the voxels fall or disappear from the object and return it back to normal. While the other two states work with the dissolve state, which the first one, dissolved to voxelized, takes the original object and turns it invisible while also covering it with voxel object at the same time. And the last one, voxelized to dissolve, turns the original object invisible and seeing the voxels fall from the object or disappearing from the object. And we've got a couple of other instances that we can use here. We have the example using via C#. Obviously for the input to work here, we need to press play. If I press A, it voxelizes the character, and if I press D, the character just kind of melts. That is so cool. Now we got to try Z to voxelize the lantern. So currently it's invisible. It's not here in the scene. Let's press Z. And now it voxelized. And let's press C. And now the object has spawned in, seamlessly come out of thin air. And it's showing us here how that plays into effect. And I'll go into the script stuff later on. Let's try the Voxelize versus Voxelizer local. Here this is saying Voxelize local can be used for standard mesh in order to simulate grid local mesh transform. The effect setting, use Voxelizer local. Go ahead and open up the Voxelizer local here and go to testing and press original mesh to voxelize. And if we go to the Voxelizer object and press testing and press original mesh to voxelize, we've got different ways of this local working, right? You can see that the left object is front on and the right object is rotated. Now if we press voxelize to dissolve, They still work fundamentally the same, just that their orientations are different. Okay, let's go ahead and disable that test area. Let's go ahead and open up the next test area. Voxelize Simple is optimized version of the Voxelizer. Supports only basic features. See documentation for more information about performance. So this is a more optimized version of it, but it's more simple. I go into more detail about this later on, but as you can see here, the more complex version does have shadows and the simple version doesn't. And the trade-off is performance. But let's go ahead and go with the Voxelizer standard. Let's go to testing and original mesh to voxelize. Let's now do voxelize to dissolve, and we'll go simple, and we'll do original to voxelized and voxelize to original, and then we can do and dissolve. It's the same effect, it's just that you don't have those finer details of the shadows, and there's a little bit more to it than that, but as the documentation states, you can go to it and see what it's talking about exactly, and I'll talk about more later on in the next section. So let's go ahead and disable that test area. Let's go into the final one where it talks about the shadows. You can keep the normal, not voxelized mesh shadow by using mesh renderer shadow only rendering. Duplicate mesh and set the duplicate cast shadows option to shadows only. So with this one, it's just talking about the shadows and that you can dissolve to the shadow or with the outline of the object. So here, if we have with the shadows to off and we do original mesh to voxelize and we do dissolve, we can still see that outline of the object there. So if we go through here and go shadows only, you can see that the shadow or the outline of it is gone. And we click on original, now we're just working with the actual voxelize. But if we go to off, then we're working back with the original mesh, or should I say the original object. So that's about it for the demo scene. Now let's actually talk about how we would implement this for our own object. So I'm just going to stay in the demo scene here, but I will be making a new object in the demo scene. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop playing. I'm just going to disable that, and I'm going to save the scene as it currently is. And let's now move into section 4, how to set up the asset with some troubleshooting. And what better way to do that than using a 3D cube? And while this should work with any object that you choose or import into the asset, for the best use of this tutorial, it will be easier to see expected results by copying my setup. But this is your project, and I'm not going to complain about the free watch hours. So if you need to come back and watch the video, go for it. Step 1, let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is right click and create a basic 3D cube. I'm just going to zero that object. I'm going to press F while I've got that object selected to bring it to my attention. And I'm not really interested in the game view, so I'm going to go ahead and move that right out of the way for now. And I'm just going to bring the cube up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Just up off the ground like that. It's currently positioned to 0, 1, 0. With the object selected, I'm just going to go ahead and collapse everything here. Step 2, add a component, and I'm going to add the Voxelizer effect script to my cube. Alright, step 3, you want to go to the setup tab under your Voxelizer effects script. Step 4, in your inspector, and we're going to enable particle effects, so we're just going to go ahead and enable that. Step 5, first reference field here where it says mesh renderer, we're just going to press find renderer, and that will assign it automatically. Step 6, for visual effect, just press setup VFX graph game object here, and note that this will actually create a child VFX graph object to your parent cube or object that you're using. If you're like me, your object picker window is viewing its content in large icon mode. If so, you might have a hard time reading the contents of that window. For this next field, when we click on the object picker icon, we're going to want to scroll out so we can actually read the names of things, because this next step is a little wonky. If you're following along, it's best to wait until I finish explaining the whole step. If you do make a mistake here, it can easily be fixed, so don't worry, but it does break the flow a little bit. So, step 7, the visual effect asset. Press the object picker icon, and then I'm going to hold control and mouse wheel out. And now we have 4 choices: a voxelizer, voxelizer local, voxelizer simple, and voxelizer simple local. You can get errors here, so it's best to select your choice by clicking it just once. If you click another one after already selecting one, you can get errors too. So for the best results, click only one once, then either click out of the window or click the close window button. Don't double click a selection like you normally would to auto close this window, as this will also result in errors. So for a perfect example of this, clicking voxelizer and then pressing the close button. As you can see, I have no errors down here. If you didn't make any mistakes, you can skip the sub steps for 7, or if you'd like to learn how to fix the issue, the sub steps for 7 will be next. If you do make an error, this is how it would look. If I clicked on this Voxelizer local, or I clicked on the Voxelizer simple to change my selection, you'll see I start getting these errors down the bottom. Same thing if I double click. If you get this error, don't worry, we can fix that. 7A, so what we can do is, if your property binder is occupied and you currently have the error message in your console, go ahead and clear the reference object from your property binder. If it is already empty, you can continue to the next sub step. So if this wasn't empty, you just press delete on that. 7B, select the object you're currently editing in the hierarchy and expand it so you can see the object's children, and select the game object VFX graph like so. 7C, in the visual effect component, open up the general category and look for the asset template. This should be the first setting there, which is just here. 7D, if this field is empty, you can go ahead and click on the object picker icon and set the voxelizer you wanted to select from step 7. If it's not empty, you can go ahead and change it here or leave it. So if you want to use the voxelizer local simple or the simple local, you can do that here. But again, if you're following along with this tutorial, we're just going to be using the standard voxelizer. So I'm going to double click that one. 7E, go back to the parent object that has the voxelizer effects script attached to it. And for the property binder, go ahead and click and drag the child VFX graph to the referenced field. If you have one or more in your hierarchy, using the item picker may not be the best choice here, because when the VFX graph object is created, it doesn't have a unique name to differentiate between them. For example, if I press the object picker icon here, you'll see that I see all the VFX graph objects and they don't have any names differentiating them. 7F, finally, if you haven't already, you can go to your console and clear it of its errors. It's common to get errors when you're using the Voxelizer local or Voxelizer simple or Voxelizer simple local asset because they're using a weld grid position. Later I'll go into detail of how to set up those assets. So if you do have that while you're following along, it's because you've chosen one of those and it's okay to leave it that way. But if you do want to continue along without any more errors and you want to try and get the best example and best use of this tutorial, again, go ahead and change that back to the Voxelizer standard. So I'm just going to delete this test object now. Going back to the original object, step 8. Next, we have a setting slider for the sample count multiplier. The lower this is, the better its performance. I believe it controls the details of the voxels to the mesh of the object. To avoid getting errors, you should set the sample count multiplier high enough to where the value beneath it, the sample count here, is at least 1 or higher. Once you've changed the value to anything you like, you go ahead and press bake. Note that I've actually scaled mine all the way up to 10, and the reason this is because the more basic your shape is, such as a cube versus a character, the higher you may need to set the slider to achieve its results. If you do get some errors here, it's likely to do with one of two things, if not both. A, the voxelizer setting you chose from step 7. If you didn't choose the plain voxelizer, you'll be getting errors, which is fine for now. And of course, B, you're putting the slider on a value too low. Below the sample count multiplier slider bar, you'll see the sample count field here that's grayed out. This value changes as you move the slider, and if the value of this field hits 0, it will continue to give you an error every frame until you move the slider to a value that moves the sample count to 1 or greater. So for example, if I set this down to a value beneath 1 and press bake, you can see I'm actually getting the error. So to fix that, as long as we go to a value above 1 and press bake again, clear this, and we see that's fine. Again, basic shape, I'm just going to press bake on 10. Just beneath the sample count here, the use per submesh baking, that's to whether you want to affect the submeshes if there's more than one. Again, for this tutorial, I'm not going to be doing that. That's something you can play around with yourself once you finish this tutorial. Step 9. Next, you'll see that there's a note with a heading above it saying important. And it states that after configuring the settings, or if something isn't working, to go ahead and click it. So let's go ahead and press this setup VFX graph. And to be honest, I don't know what the issue it is that it solves, since clicking this doesn't clear the errors that were generated from step 7 or if you hit 0 on the above multiplier. It does, however, alter the VFX graph object child. Before I press that, I'll show you what I mean. If I expand this and go to VFX graph, and down the bottom here, we see that there is an empty list for the VFX property binder. If I now press set up VFX graph and then go down here, you'll see that's actually now referencing the transform of our cube. We can now see some voxels. Also, if for whatever reason that you're setting up your object while it's disabled in the hierarchy, it actually changes the VFX graph object to be different to how you would if it was enabled. For example, if I go to create 3D object and go to cube, and we'll just say test again, and I set this object to disabled, and I just move it out of the way. So if I turn it on, we can see it's in a different position. If I add the component Voxelizer effect, go to setup, and then I do the standard procedure. Also note that when I'm changing this multiplier, that the sample count is lower than what it would be if it was enabled. And that's obviously because the mesh isn't active at the moment. That's something to take into account. Now, if I press that set up VFX graph and go to the VFX graph child object, you'll see that the property binder that was altered in the original object is empty, but it adds another script to it, the Lucy transform. It's now giving us a property string transform, and it gives us a target which is referencing the parent object's transform. I don't know what the purpose of this is, but it's just something to take note of. The documentation does recommend doing this step at the start, but I personally think it's easier to follow from top to bottom than it is to switch between the settings. What we're going to do now is set up our material. Let's go ahead into our project window, create a new material. So go to project, go to assets. I'm going to right click first and create a new folder, and I'm going to call it materials. I'm going to open that folder, and I'm going to right click and create a new material. I'm just going to go ahead and call it the test Voxelizer material. The reason I'm creating one over using the standard one is because the standard one can't be altered or changed. We'll be using this material now alongside with the voxel shader. However, it won't dissolve just yet like it did in our example. For the proper material setup, I'll leave that towards the end of step 15, which I'll mark in the video description. So you can head there now and do that now if you like, or to stick with the flow of this guide, you can just stay following and we will get to that step. Step 11, take that material that was just made and apply it to the object. So we can do that either by dragging it onto the object like that. Unity did not like me doing that. If your editor crashes, that apparently is normal. This didn't happen in my testing. And because I didn't save, my objects was deleted. Let that be a lesson, folks, that we should always save regularly while we're testing these things, hey? So I'm going to right click, create cube. I'm going to just name it cube, leave it as it was. I'm going to reposition that to 0, 1, 0. And I'm just going to press F to zoom in on it. I'm now going to add component, go back to the Voxelizer effects script, go to setup, go to particle effects enable. I'm going to allow it to find it in the renderer by itself, the visual effect. I'm going to press setup VFX graph game object, visual effect asset. Well, we need to make sure that we click the object picker icon over here and select the Voxelizer, and then I'm going to just press close. And I'm going to scale that up by 10. I'm going to bake that, and now I'm going to press setup VFX graph. Now for the materials, back to where we just were before I crashed. So obviously it crashed when I tried to drag that material onto the object. What I might suggest what we do instead is to go to the mesh renderer here and click and drag that onto our material here instead. I have had it working where I just click and drag the material onto the object, so you can just apply it there. I might have just gotten unlucky and my editor was a little bit unstable and crashed. I'm just going to save the scene now. I suggest you do the same. Okay, step 12. What we want to do is we want to go to the bottom of our game object, and that material we just applied would be down here. And we want to click on the reference field to the side of shader here and click that. And then we want to press on iNav Studios, and then we want to select the Voxelizer effect. With that applied, I'm just going to save the project, and now our material is using the iNav Studio Voxelizer effect shader. Step 13. Then we want to go back to the setup category under the Voxelizer effect script. It's just here. And then we want to go to the material settings. Here there will be a enable disable field under the materials, which is use instance materials. And then we'll see a materials heading with a list under it. Simply put, the use instance material enable disable field is an automatic box which lets the class the script automatically select the material that's on the object at runtime, which is great if you intend to leave the same material on the object throughout the game. However, if you're switching materials, you'll need to reference that material in the materials list. If you want to test the dissolve effects in the editor, you will also need reference the current material on the object, which you can easily do with the find and renderer button below the list. So again, for this tutorial, we're just going to go with find in renderer. And now if we expand that, we'll see that the test voxelizer material, which is also the reference material here, is the one that it's talking about. And of course, if you're just going to be using the one material, you can skip that by just using the instance materials. But for the editor testing purposes, we do need to have it referenced here. Step 14. We're almost done with the basics. Next, we actually need to apply a transition effect. To do this, we go back to the Voxelizer effects script in the inspector, which I still am already on, and we're going to find the category effect setup, which will just be below our setup category. Here's our setup category. There's our effect settings. Now in this effect settings category, we do have a use Voxelizer local and use a Voxelizer simple. I'm not going to cover those here just yet. I'll cover these in the deeper dive in the next section. Also for the original mesh, I'll cover that in the next section. We just want to pay attention to the transition settings count and the transition settings. For now, with this simple setup guide, we're just going to make sure that the transition settings count is set to 1. We don't want to use more than 1 just yet. And now we want to expand that transition settings. You'll see it says transition settings data 0 or data, depending on where you're coming from. You'll see that there's none. We can press create, but we're not going to. We're going to press the object picker tool and we're going to select transition settings number 4. Double click that. Unlike the other window, you can safely double click that. These transition settings you can consider as presets. These presets are different ways that the voxels interact with your object and also how it dissolves your material. You must have at least 1 transition setting for it to obviously to work, but you can have up to 4 on the same script. But for now, I'm not going to go into too much detail on them because again, in the next section, I'll be doing a deep dive on the transition settings and fine tuning your setup. So I'll be doing that at the end of step 16. Again, that will be timestamped in the video description. So go ahead and click that if you'd like to jump to it. The best use of this guide, just go ahead and set the transition settings to 4 and we'll cover the rest when we get up to it. We now have a very basic implementation of this asset working in our own project. Now we can go to the test category of our Voxelizer effect script in the inspector. If we press original mesh to voxelize, we'll see some voxels getting thrown on the object. Obviously your object will already have some voxels on there from when we baked it earlier. Press original mesh to voxelize a couple of times just to get it to refresh itself. Now that it's done that, we can go ahead and press dissolve to voxelized. Now we can press voxelize to original mesh. And now we can see that it's returning back to the basic object. I haven't got the dissolve settings in just yet where the material dissolves, and that's okay because we'll be doing that in the next section. But that is the basics of our object for now. We have original mesh to voxelized and voxelized back to the original mesh. Okay, let's move into the next section, which is just to expand upon the basics a little bit. Let's go to step 15, setting up the material to dissolve. That material that we made earlier, go ahead and navigate back to it. So for me in this project, it was under assets and materials. I'm going to click on this. That way it becomes the focus under my inspector window. Now, obviously this brings up our material settings. Now we want to go to our first category, which is surface input. And the setting we want to be looking for is alpha clipping. Let's go ahead and enable that. You can already see that our object has just gone semi-transparent. I'm going to go ahead and set mine to 0. You can play around with this as much as you like. Further it is to 1, the more transparent the object will become from the material. Obviously, I'm going to be setting mine to 0. If you'd like to play around with this yourself, you can go to one of the materials used by one of demo scene objects and then copy that material's settings and apply them to here so you can get the closer effect of that material. For example, if you want to do that, if we go to basics and expand that, go to the barrel, and then we've got the barrel material here. We can click on that, and clicking on that, if it didn't take you to that material straight away, it's probably just because you've got this lock active. just make sure that is unlocked and click on the barrel material, and you can copy these material settings here. But obviously, again, for this tutorial, I'm just going to be using my basic white material here. And let's see now, if we press dissolve, see our material disappears and our material comes back when we press voxelize to original mesh. So our material now goes transparent. Let's move into step 16, transition effects settings. Return to the object with the voxelizer effects script and make it the focus of the inspector. Go to the effect settings category, and here you'll see the use voxelizer local and the voxelizer simple. These work hand in hand with those choice categories from option 7. If you wanted to use voxelizer local, you'd need to follow the instructions from sub step 7a to 7f. Just like this. Use voxelizer local, go to the setup, the property binder here, I'm just going to clear that for a moment, and the visual effect, just going to clear that. I'm going to go to the child VFX graph, and under general, the asset template, I'm going to go ahead and press the object picker icon, and I'm going to choose voxelizer local. I'm going to close that and go back to the parent object, and now I'm going to re-reference this object in the property binder. If you're using the voxelizer simple, you would have the local off and you'd have the simple enable. Go to the VFX graph and then choose the object picker for the asset template, and then pick voxelizer simple and close that. And now you're using the voxelizer simple profile. And if you're using both, you simply have both of them selected here, and under the VFX graph, you choose your object picker here and press the voxelizer simple local. Again, I'm just going to stick with the voxelizer standard, so I'm just going to go back and have both of these disabled. But that's how you can set those profiles up. Essentially what this does, the voxelizer local, this stops voxels from snapping to the world-based grid position, so they're using the object's position. While the voxelizer simple turns off shadows and other features such as transitions and grid rotations. The initial effect state is next, and this is what state the object is in when the game starts. You won't see these changes until you press play, and then the inspector will update, reflecting the state that it's meant to be starting in. It's pretty cool to see that we can change this state from the start using the original mesh, which is leaving it default, to voxelize, which is seeing it start with voxels, and to dissolve, which, well, I guess not seeing it all at the start. So if I press voxelize and press play, you can see that we're starting voxelized. If I stop and I press dissolved and I press play again, it's dissolved entirely. And then obviously if I press original mesh and press play, we go back to the original. Again, at this point, we've done some more expansion on those basic implementations of this asset. Again, you can stop here and play around a little bit, or you can keep watching as I continue in more depth for more customization of the settings. We're heading back to the transition settings. To do that, we're going to go ahead and click on the effects settings and transition settings here. I'm just going to clear out this preset. So as I said earlier, we can consider these as presets. Some presets will only affect the dissolve effect, and some will only affect the voxel effect, which is why I chose to use the preset 4, as this does affect both of them inherently. I don't want to break down each preset individually here in this video, as that would make this video even longer than it needs to be. So you can just quickly play around with these assets to see if you like what they do. And since I've removed that preset already, once that field's clear, we actually get this create button here. And this allows you to create your own preset transition. Press create so you can see this pop up. Now we're using transition settings. If I press the object picker icon, you can see that these two share the same name. One of them is a default that comes with the asset, and the other one is the one that we just created. What I suggest you do is ensure that your project window is unlocked, and then click on that reference field here to actually take us to the preset we just created. I would then click on that and click it one more time and actually name this. So we can call this our custom preset and then 1. You can name this whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. You just want to separate this from the pre-made ones that come with the asset. You can create these transition settings and then import them to other projects using this dynamic voxelizer asset. If you need to find these later on, go to iNav Studios, go to particle effects, transition settings and voxelizer, and then again transition settings. And this will be your presets that you create. However, if you're looking for the standard presets, you can go to the iNab Studios folder, go to Voxelizer, go to transition settings, and that will be the standard inbuilt presets that come with the asset. Let's again go back to our game object here, and we'll go back to the transition settings, and there we can see our updated custom preset 1. For this part, I'm going to quickly speed run these settings, as these are best learnt by testing and seeing the changes take place. First, we have the transition type. Here is where we can pick whether this effect applies to the voxels and or the dissolve effect. So we can click on that and see which ones we want to apply to. So obviously this is going to apply to all of them. Duration is how long this effect plays for. Transition smoothness, the overall impact progress. Less is blotchy and more is a clear transition. Scale curve changes the overall effects interaction. Snap transition to weld. So again, this is just how that snap to weld grid plays from the example we saw earlier. Use normal offsets. This changes the way voxels are spawned towards the object. Subsettings are to adjust this effect's impact. So for example, if I open up the testing and let's just play it once to see what it looks like with just this custom preset. And then let's just go with back to the original. So it's a pretty standard approach. It just spawns those voxels as if they're growing out from the original object. So now if I click normal offset, you can see that they kind of home in from their own axis. And same thing for the dissolve, they kind of pull away. So then you can change the sliders, how it interacts for that setting. Let's disable that. Next up, we have the noise offset. This also changes the way voxels are spawned towards the object, but to improve randomness by using noise. Again, subsettings are to adjust the effects of this impact. So if I enable this one now, and I press original to vortex, you can see that it kind of comes in from random direction. And again, we can change the strength of this effect. Going to disable that one now. Use random position offset. This changes the way voxels are spawned towards the object, but by entering in offsets to make it come from a more particular direction. So we kind of have like a matrix effect there, where it's like that spawn in kind of from the top. And if we change these directions, we can have it spawn from these different directions now. I haven't experimented too much with it yet, but you could use a class to inject a unity.random role into this to give you a different voxel impact each time this plays. Or if you're a 10x dev, if this object is getting destroyed by something hitting it, you could apply a physics impact that translates into the impact into which direction the voxel should scatter. That's well above my pay grade, but I'll do a more in-depth scripting guide using this asset one day. Though I would have to ask the developers permission about that though, as I wouldn't want to accidentally expose their source code without their permission. Now, in my opinion, we have the sickest effect out of this whole lot. It applies physics for you. Unlike my other example, however, it applies relative to the object, not what's impacting it. Regardless, this looks bloody cool. Press the original mesh to vortex here, and I'm going to press now the vortex to original mesh, and now we have the physics applying to it where it melts. Now, obviously for the physics, we have the lifetime, how long that effect of the physics should play for. So if I choose 10 seconds, it's going to last for 10 seconds. Rather than just the 5 seconds. If I choose 1 second, it won't last long enough to show us the whole effect. Scale over life obviously changes how the physics is applied to the transition. We also have a gravity, obviously, of how strong the gravity is being applied to those voxels that are falling, the force being applied to those voxels falling, and then the turbulence, such as you can think of it as wind picking up those particles and scattering them, and the frequency of it being scattered, the velocity strength of the voxels falling, and then a bunch of collider settings here, and then how the skin applies different physics effects as well. Next, we're going to expand upon the visual properties. And again, I don't want to make this video huge, so I'm just going to quickly summarize it. The voxel color heading contains subsettings that change the color of the voxels for your object. Again, it's best to play around with this to see what settings you like, but you can click on the object picker icon and choose any 2D texture, pre-made or custom, to affect your voxel colors. The asset does include a grid base map. Grab that, as that's just pretty much a basic 2D texture that you can use to apply here, and then you can just change the color based on what you want. And of course, you can make your own and give it more specifics. You can obviously change the color of it, you can change the tiling, and you can change the map offset as you're related to the texture and how the textures lay over. And then if you just want to use the base map properties that are already already on that, you can reset it there or set it there. Under the title General, there's a reference field for guide texture, and this directly affects your voxel spawn pattern. So you can use different noise textures to enhance your effects. And of course, there's a bunch of sub settings here that you can use to change the overall effect of it. So I'm just going to pick a random noise one here, and I'm just going to select, say, noise 28. And you can see that that's applying to my material. That's already looking pretty damn cool, if I might say so myself. Now, the last thing I want to cover here is the VFX graph settings. The grid size is referring to the voxel scale size. Bigger equals a bigger voxel. For example, if I scale this up, you can see those grids getting larger, and the smaller they are. Grid rotation y-axis affects the voxel's rotation relative to world space. So for example, we can rotate them to 45 degrees. We can rotate the object, but as we move the object, that those voxels stay in their orientation. The snap to world grid is about the world grid setting, and when we disable that, it says hint, with snap to world grid disabled, voxels won't snap to the grid when you rotate mesh, when skinned mesh is sampled, etc. Update color every frame. This is for voxel colors. If they're meant to change, you can set it here to check for those changes every frame. Randomize position strength. This slightly adjusts the position of voxel placement on the object. So if I move this position strength, spawn rate. This directly controls the amount of voxels that spawn. However, once you get to a larger value, the random position strength will make it appear as if there's more voxels. This is because the voxels are stacked on top of each other when the position strength is lower. So for example, if I have set to 25, we only have 25 voxels there, and as I move the position strength up, there's still only 25 there, but it's just slightly altering their random positions. As I get to that larger value I was talking about, because they're stacked on top of each other and we move that up, that the ones that are stacked are actually getting scattered rather than stacking on top of each other. Scale multiplier. This directly multiplies the size of the voxel. And to actually see this scale change, you can just move the randomized position strength here, and that will live update in the editor for you. And the final two settings are relative to the material. I haven't noticed any difference using these, however, I also haven't paid particular attention to the material settings. But I do know that they directly change the voxelizer properties of the material attached to the object. Now let's take a quick look at the example script and how to use it. And I figured this would be fine to show since it doesn't reveal any of the source code. So I'm just going to go to the example using via C#, and I'm just going to double click on this script field here, and that will automatically prompt open my IDE. And to be completely honest, this is very clear and a simple example of how to use this asset in script, in code. I also tested how simple it would be to control the effect parameters via code, and it's very straightforward, so you could make your own changes quite easily. This script example is showing us 4 effects being referenced. By effects, I mean the Voxelizer effects scripts. And from here, we can also manipulate their parameters. If we do need to make changes to the Voxelizer effects script, it's very easy to do so. So if we need to make changes from our script here, it's very easy to manipulate the parameters. We just got to change some fields from private to public, or use setters and getters. Again, I'm not going to go into that unless I have direct permission from the developer to be able to do something like that. Again, I don't want to accidentally expose his source code. I particularly like the fact that the example buttons in the editor are exactly the same calls we would use for the script, so it makes it very simple to see and understand what we're editing. Again, I'm not the best at reading and interpreting, so the fact that I was able to pick this up in less than a minute really speaks volumes of how simple this is to use in scripting. So dev, in terms of simplicity to being able to use your asset with external scripts, I give it an A+. Well done. If you want to use other 3D models with this asset, I'm going to quickly show you how to prepare them. For this example, I will be using a Cinti Studios asset, in particular their space pack. We're going to need to alter the material and also need to alter the mesh. So in the case of this Cinti model here, I'm going to click on its mesh and make sure that your project window is unlocked. So that way when you click on it, it will take you to the mesh. That mesh is expanded. You want to make sure that you click on its parent object, which is this one here. You'll want to click on the model tab in the inspector, and you'll want to scroll down to the read write. You need to have the read write enabled, and you need to then press apply. With that done, we'll now need to edit the material. So click back to your object that you're trying to edit and make sure you save the scene, because the Unity editor for you may crash when you're playing with the material, but just be aware of that. Go back to the main asset folder here, going to click on the object. We're going to go to the mesh renderer component. We're going to select the material that is currently on this object. Again, making sure that our project window is unlocked. So we're going to click that. That will take us to the material. Now you'll want to make sure that you actually copy this material. Don't just edit this one, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm just going to Control C and Control V, or copy paste, duplicate. And I'm just going to rename this one VFX. Now with that material selected, we're going to go up to the shader up the top right here in the inspector. Make sure that you've got the right material selected. And we're going to go to iNav Studios and use Voxelizer effect. Now you'll notice that this material has now been stripped of all its properties. That's why I said to make sure that you do a clone of this. Go to surface inputs and then default, and we'll need to add the textures to this to prepare it correctly for the asset. I found the easiest thing to do is to add another inspector to our scene so we can directly reference it without having to constantly switch between two windows. I've already got two windows here, but for anyone following along, to do that, I'm going to go onto one of my anchored positions. I'm going to click the 3-dot icon, and I'm going to click Add Tab and click Inspector. I'm now going to grab that new inspector window I just made and drag it to the side of that other inspector window, so now they're anchored next to each other. Now I'm going to go back into my project window, and now I've got the same material selected twice. I'm going to lock one of my inspectors, that way it stays on this material, and then I'm going to refer back to the original material and select the material I want to be referencing, which is this one, and now I'm going to lock that window as well. Now you'll notice here that these two inspectors don't align in terms of content. I'm not the best with textures and materials, but I've gotten it close enough to where it seems to be the same thing. If you do know the exact settings that should align here, then feel free to drop a comment into the video to let me and everyone else know what the correct references are here. So me, what I've found, the base map will be the texture. So what we can do there is just press on the texture here under the original material, get reference to which texture it is, click and drag that into the base map of our VFX material. I'm going to go to the surface options and change the alpha clipping threshold for the VFX material all the way over to 0, so that way it's not transparent. Now we need to add in the details and emissive textures. So I believe here the emission map is the emissive, so let's click that and drag that one in, and I believe the oculation map is the detail. Again, I'm not too sure if that is the case. If you do know, please again drop it in the comments to let me and everyone else know. Again, save this spare inspector. Now you can close if you like. I'm just going to leave it there for the time being. I'm going to unlock my original inspector. I'm going to click on my game object again. I'm going to go back to my assets and find that material that we just edited. So for me, I'm just going to click on that materials reference under the mesh renderer, grab the VFX poly here and drag that in. Now this object is ready to go. I'm just going to go ahead and save the scene now. We're ready to go. I am going to close this inspector. I don't need this anymore. I'm going to now press Add Component, Voxelizer Effect, do the standard setup, particle, find renderer, setup graph. Going to choose the Voxelizer. You can see we've got a very high value here, so we'll be able to change that if we like. Set up VFX graph. The materials, I'm just going to say find and renderer. The material for itself has disappeared, but we can see that there's a couple of tiny little squares around here. I don't know if the recorder will pick it up, but I can see them. They almost look like little broken pixels. Now I'm going to go to the effect settings, transition settings, and I'm just going to use that transition preset number 4. I'll leave physics on. I'll go to testing, and now I'll press voxelize to original mesh, and hopefully we'll see my mesh come back. Oh, there it is. Okay, and we'll press original mesh to voxelized. Okay, so those voxels are very, very small. So we need to go ahead and edit them. So the first thing I'm going to do is increase their size. I went for a grid size of 0.1 with a randomizer position of 0, a spawn rate of 15,000 and a scale multiplier of 50. So obviously at some point you're going to want to increase the amount of particles that you're spawning in for this voxel effect. As we already know, that spawn rate is what we can change to get more particles in. But at some point we'll get that warning that says make sure to increase the capacity of the VFX graph to match the spawn rate number of particles. So you might be asking, well, how do I do that? Now I know the bare minimum when it comes to VFX graph effects, but what you can do is as you can see down the bottom here, I was playing around with the graph. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that for now, and I'm going to make sure to create a clone so you don't alter the default effect. So I'm going to copy that and paste it, and I'm just going to rename it custom. I'm going to double click that to open it. I'm going to scroll in. This big part here, we want to go above that. And at the very top here, where it says System 1, we have Capacity. That's what we can edit to increase the amount of particles that we spawn in. Just take note that at some point, depending on your model, you're going to run into the issue where the randomized position will start to be ineffective. I haven't worked it out yet, but you'll need to find the setting in the effect graph to increase the bounds of the randomizer. And that just about covers everything in this asset. All over, I'd rate this asset a solid 7 out of 10, but for the Unity Asset Store, I'd rate it a 5 out of 5. I'm only deducting points here because this asset has some very strict install conditions. If the project isn't properly set up before the asset's imported, the asset won't work at all. And trying to remove all the files that the asset injected into the project could be a little bit cumbersome. So in terms of cleaning up the project to then re-importing everything in the correct order, it can be a little bit of a tedious process, which isn't against the developer because these things can be out of our control, and in this case it is. But I'm looking at this from a new user's perspective, as if I was just a new user picking up this asset for the first time. While there is documentation, it doesn't go too much in depth about all of its systems, which is why I decided to make this video, which when I come back to using this asset in one of my own projects, I'll be able to refer to it myself later. I love this asset. I think it offers a lot, and most importantly, it's given me a spark of creation. And I can't fault an asset that gives you a bit of motivation and the creative thinking side of things. So this asset is normally 30 USD, which for me is $45, which is quite a lot of money, but currently it is on sale for $15. If I didn't own this asset and I was looking at this the first time, I'd be a little bit hesitant to spend the full $45 on this asset in my currency. However, if I knew beyond certainty what this asset does, how easily it is to be manipulated with my own scripts, then I wouldn't hesitate. So knowing what I know now, would I pay for it again? Yes, I would. And especially if you see this asset on sale, I would 100% pick it up. I think this asset is worth the price. It's self-contained. I didn't have to reach out to the creator for any support. And if it is still on sale by the time you see this, or still is by the time you see it, I would definitely recommend picking it up. This asset by iNab Studios is actually the second I've done a tutorial on, but it's the first ever official review I've ever done. And that's because this asset is still new. And I feel like I get to have a bit of an opinion on it because I've spent my time getting to know it, so in the end I would recommend it. Great job on this asset, iNab Studios, and I look forward to seeing what you release in the future. Till next time, see ya.